Today's episode is brought to you by the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, USDA NIFA, and the University of Hawaiʻi College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources, and the Livestock Extension Group.
Aloha, welcome everyone to the Livestock Walaʻau, a podcast aimed to provide educational support, information, guidance, and outreach to our livestock stakeholders in Hawaiʻi. We are your hosts, Mele Oshiro and
Shannon Sand.
And today I'm going to talk about backyard poultry, kind of a little bit. Yeah, more specifically.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, raising laying pullets for backyard. And
so do you want to go into, like, I don't know which counties allow it, which don't? Are there different cities, different districts, things like that?
That's, I think, the biggest thing when you start to think about raising pullets or layers or any type of livestock really in your backyard. I think that's your first question is, one, how much space do I have? Two, am I allowed to have it here? And every single county is gonna be different. Like, even if you go from town to town, it could be different. And pretty much the one kind of similar thing across most counties is that if you're in a residential area, you are almost not allowed to have some type of agriculture production as far as animals or livestock. You really have to check your area. So the first step really is, if you want to have animals in that or livestock in your backyard, poultry specifically, what we're talking about today, is check with your county planning department and get the information from there. You can get some of the Hawaii County does have a sort of general list of like your zoning area and what it is, if it's Ag 5 or all that stuff. You can kind of go through this one list and it does give you some general information, but I would follow that up with an email or call to your county department and make sure, based on your tax map key, what you're allowed.
Because some of them can have hens but not roosters. Exactly. I know there's a lot of nuances to it, is my understanding.
Yeah. And I think even some areas, like, it's going to depend on how big of your area. If it's an ag lot, how much you can have too, right? And then if you're in an ag area, you say you're on an ag lot, but you have an HOA, homeowner association. That's another thing to consider. And that's a whole another ballpark that's going to be completely dependent on your HOA. So those are kind of your first steps, right? How much area do you have and what are you allowed to have in the area that you're at? So say you're sweet, you're good, you're allowed to have hens, roosters, whatever you want. Then you can start to kind of think about, okay, how much space do I want to dedicate to them? Exactly what you want for that space that you have. And the other thing to kind of think about too. No, go ahead. What is that?
I was going to ask about spacing. So like, how much space does like one hen need?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the breed that you get, because some of your heavier breeds will need a little bit more space. And it's going to depend if you're going to keep them completely confined or you're going to have an area for them to have a run. Confined areas, you need to have at least 2 to 3 square feet per bird. Maybe a little bit more if you have some of the heavier, dual purpose breeds like your Buff Orpingtons. All those heavier breeds sometimes will need a little bit more space. If you're going to have them in a run, saying you're not really doing like a confined feeding operation, then you need a lot more space. You're looking at somewhere between probably 8 to 10 square feet per bird, because they're in sort of a pastured poultry situation, right? And those kinds of things are all going to adjust, because some people have yards. Like, for instance,
that would be my other question is what about like I just have a yard, but I know we can have chicken. I also, I have a lot of questions about this. So keep going, Melanie, and I'll ask as we go.
Yeah, and we'll try, I'll try to answer the questions as I go through a little bit of the steps, but pretty much getting started, that's where we want to be. And then you kind of think about your poultry, right? So we're talking more layer hens, right? Pullets, raising pullets in your backyard. So we're talking about
it's a lot easier than anything else too.
Yeah. And it's kind of what a lot of folks are raising in their backyard. You have a sort of pet that is producing food for your family, which is always so wonderful. How much do you want, right? How many eggs do you want per week or whatnot? And how many hens do you want to be feeding? If you're raising them chicks, to get to the point where they're laying, each bird, you're probably going to go through about 12 to 14 pounds of feed per bird per chick.
Well, and it takes 6 to 8 months from chicks, is my understanding.
Exactly.
Before
Yeah.
they start
From
laying.
chick to lay, you know,
My
they're going to be
experience.
8 months old. Yeah. So you're going to have a long period in between there. So that's the other thing is, one, decide how many eggs do you want? You know, the initial cost is about 12 pounds of feed per chick before they get their first lay. So, you know, you got to think about that if you're, you know, calculate that across however many you want.
Right.
And then the equipment to raise those chicks in a brooder, you know, you can go simple. A lot of people use swimming pools, you know, those hard plastic swimming pools, have a cover over it. You need to make sure you have a light source in there, have some type of bedding, water, and feed, right, for them. Or, you know, if you can buy there's a lot of other commercial brooders that you can buy online. So there's a lot of different
just did
options.
a plastic tub for
you can do
a few chicks.
Tubs.
Yeah, it had the heat lamp and exactly newspaper, so the kids could change it out every day.
Yeah, so it really depends on how many chicks you're going to get, on how you're going to establish the brooder, or if you're not going to even get chicks and you want to buy pullets that are not quite lay, but they're 6 to 8 weeks out. You don't need to have
you can buy that.
Source.
I didn't know that was an option.
So you can buy pullets. They're a little bit more expensive than buying a chick because
I would imagine.
Of course
you already have the feed investment.
Yeah, but then they're ready to go outdoors. They don't need a heat source. You know, they can be in your run and whatever you have set up already for them when they become late, when they start laying. So those are the kinds of things I think you need to think about. And then, of course, what type of breed do you want? There's so many different ones. There's the commercial breeds or strains of animals that are typically like hybrids. So they're basically bred and their genetics is for egg production, so they'll definitely be producing eggs for a longer period of time. So if you're looking at raising pullets for essentially your homes, you might be wanting to look at a hybrid option because you're going to get more eggs for a longer period of time. And they come into lay a lot quicker than more heritage type breed like your Buff Orpingtons or your Rhode Island Reds, Americanas, all those other heritage breeds do take a little bit more time to come into lay or start laying.
Okay, so kind of to go backwards a little bit in terms of like before time, but just breeds to pick from. If you were someone that had like a smaller space and like you said, just basically kind of has like a backyard type of situation, like a small one, I don't know what a small one is, smaller backyard, maybe a couple 100 square feet or something. I'm assuming you'd be better off getting something like one of those breeds that's like smaller.
So if you have, there are smaller heritage type breeds that you can look at. The Buff Orpingtons are kind of on like that bigger end, right? And all those are like a little bit on the bigger end, but there are smaller Rhode Island Reds. There's some other True Greens and whatnot that you can choose. So they're smaller type on the heritage breeds that you can still get, and it's really going to be preference, right? Because like I said, it's going to be down to what you prefer. Are you having, is this going to be just straight production food for the family, or for your homestead or whatnot, or is this going to be something that we can also consider a pet in the yard, but is also providing food, so you want something pretty in your yard.
Yes. And then also, do we want brown eggs, white eggs, blue eggs, green eggs, pink eggs, yellow eggs? There's all kinds.
Yeah. And the egg shell color is just eggshell color. It doesn't necessarily change. But if you are, like me, I like and prefer to have, I like to prefer to have those, and for us, we do it for both, for the kids, for learning, and for production and subsistence for our families that we share. It depends on what you want as far as breeds. But like I said, if you are looking for something for production and you want the most eggs out of a bird, you're probably going to want to go with a commercial strain or a hybrid that is bred for egg production, and they're going to come into lay quicker, be productive for much longer period of time.
Yeah, it just depends on what you're looking for, like you said. But I don't know. Growing up, I always picked the chickens for my 4-H projects based on the color of eggs.
Right.
I know. Also how interesting they looked, because I was like, I don't really want like a boring old red chicken. I was like, I don't want that. I'm like,
I
always
agree.
get the
I'm like,
unique
you know what?
ones.
If they're going to be in my yard and I'm going to feed them, I'm going to get the ones that I want to look at. But it's all in preference. And we tend to mix what we have as far as breeds so that we can have kind of eggs throughout the year, because there's even some breeds that will do a little bit better through molting and still lay. That's other things to consider. One other thing to think about is kind of where, a question I always get is, where can we get chicks from?
Oh, yeah.
I would suggest for you to pick a hatchery. We have a local hatchery in Oahu called Acai's, but get to your local hatcheries and choose one that is certified for NPIP program. The NPIP program program that these producers have to follow, these production folks have to follow to ensure biosecurity within their herds, their flocks, excuse me.
Oh, that's important, especially nowadays.
And then looking and making sure these animals, the birds are tested for some different strains of salmonella. And it just kind of ensures that, they have to follow certain protocols to ensure the health of their flocks. Choosing birds from there is just going to be better for you. You'll know you're getting it from a very reliable source. You can check. Some of the hatcheries will sell older pullets, not just chicks. So you can order them as older, but just keep in mind that they're going to be more expensive per bird. Your chicks cost you $5 to $8 a chick, whereas buying a pullet from a hatchery could cost you anywhere between $25 to $35. And check with your hatchery on what vaccinations they do require, or that they do at the hatchery. Here in Hawaii, you do want to have your birds vaccinated for Marek's. You want to do fall pox as well. Some hatcheries do also have available the coccidiosis vaccination that you can do for the chicks. And those all have to be done like at day one. So if you're buying it from your hatchery, check with them what they do.
Yeah.
And ask for those if you can get it done prior to you getting them. The pox vaccine, unfortunately, that you need to do a little bit later when they're a little older, because that's a different vaccination. But those are things to consider. So, look for those hatcheries that are in that NPIP program. There's a few, Acai's is, and so you can go to local feed stores as well. They'll bring in chicks, and they're a great resource for information, setting up things and getting those feed resources from them. If you do decide, the chicks go through different phases of growth, right? The first 4 weeks of their life is pretty much where they need to get that good start. And where you're going to kind of set them up to kind of meet those other growing phases. Once they get to about 6 weeks or 7 weeks, they'll be fully feathered. You can go ahead and start putting them outside. Yeah. So you can take them off the heat, and use here in Hawaii, you have to kind of play the heat, but based on your area is what I've kind of found, and you may not have to have that heat lamp on them for the whole entire period. Be cautious during the summertime. If you have your brooders set up in a garage or workshop, it's going to get hotter in there during the day. So you just make sure when you set up those brooders, I'll talk a little bit more about setting up your brooder, but just adjusting that heat cycle. As the chicks grow, you have to lower that heat cycle so they start to acclimate to the different temperatures and the lower temperatures that they're going to be exposed to once they go outside into a run or whatnot. Shannon's going to try and keep me on track while I talk about this stuff and pop questions in here.
Yeah, but I think this is interesting. So I was like, just keep going. It's fine. So
so that's kind of your first step. So we figured out we can have chicks. We figured out what kind we want or what birds, breeds, and all those types of things, So now we have to set up your brooder, getting prepared to receive those chicks. Main thing is you have a heat source in there. You need to have a heat source in there that's kind of situated in one section of your brooder. You want to be able to have an area of the brooder that's not so hot. The chicks can get away from the heat.
Back and forth.
Exactly. They'll adjust themselves. So there's so many different types of heat sources. If you're going to use a light, like an actual
we always just used a heat lamp growing up, to be honest.
Make sure whatever materials you use as a base for your brooder or other materials in there, that they're a good 18 inches or so away from that heat source so it doesn't catch fire. There's other heat source out there nowadays that are more hot as those heat lamps. So
not
it's
as
kind
concerning.
Not as concerning, not too much of a fire
So
hazard.
what are some of the other options then?
Radiant heat, so it comes out, I can't remember what they call them,
but they're essentially like a heating pad type of thing.
Exactly. And it's kind of on a stand. Think of it like as on a stand, so you can raise this stand up or down, and it's supposed to mimic more so the mama, right? Their mama hen, as how she sits on her chicks.
Oh,
So yeah, so it's kind of like a heating pad, right? And so you raise the level of it depending on how old they are and whatnot. They can go crawl underneath it, and they have some other heat lamps too that are not hot to the touch. So it's not same thing, you know, it's just a kind of a radiant heat and not a light bulb that essentially gets hot. So you don't need to worry too much about the fire hazards. And
that's always nice.
yeah, they're a little more expensive, you know, but I think they probably are a little bit more energy efficient as well than your heat lamps. Using your heat lamps too, when you want to make sure if you do have to use a heat lamp or a bulb, you're using a red one. The red one just kind of tends to not affect their sleep patterns in the birds, right? So there's studies that they look at using white light or red light. So red light's just better.
I know we always used the red light growing up.
Yeah, and it doesn't have that much impact on the animals as compared to those white light. And make sure, like I said, they have an opportunity to get away from the heat source if they need to. And now you need to make sure you have food and water in there. I like to keep my waters. I use those nipple waters because I feel like they just make less mess. When I first get the birds, I'll put them in there. What are the nipple
waters?
So they're little waters. They have this little balance in there, so they'll tap again on the metal.
Just like what you use for a rabbit. Okay,
exactly.
I got it. Okay,
yeah.
I didn't know that's what that was called.
There's so many different ones that you can choose from nowadays, and you can buy them, attach them to your own buckets, and set them up however you'd like.
I was gonna say it's kind of a nice little auto waterer
exactly.
For them too. Then
and like the first couple days, I'll put a regular waterer in there. You know, those upside down. I don't even know what they're called, but I'll put that in there.
They're so messy though.
They're
so messy.
Yeah. But it's a good way for them to make sure that they're getting water when you first receive your chicks. Yeah. And that's when you do receive your chicks, that's the most important thing, is have a water source for them. Like usually it's here in Hawaii, you know, it's going to come in either through the post office or FedEx or something like that. When you know you're going to receive them, just make sure you have water with you, because those chicks are typically going to be super thirsty. Offer them food within like 24 hours or so, but they typically have this brown fat resource that they have, which allows them to be shipped. And then you want to adjust your brooder temperatures at about 5 degrees. Drop it down weekly, all the way until you reach, and we're talking Fahrenheit here, until you kind of reach that outdoor temperature of where your chicks are going to be, you know, which is typically about whatever your location is. Yeah. So. You know, and you can kind of adjust it, like I said. Yeah. So that's kind of where you go. Like I said, I like to use the nipple water feeders or waters because I feel like it makes less of a mess in there. You have to kind of show the chicks how to use it. Even when you put water sources in there, I just kind of take one chick, dip his beak in there, or I tap his beak to the water nipple. And once one figures it out, they all just kind of copy each other. So they'll go over there and start pecking away at it. And it usually does work pretty well. Yeah. And then, you know what, like I said, 6 to 7 weeks old, your birds should be fully feathered. They should be able to go outside, you know.
So once they're ready to go outside, what do you, I mean, I know what we always did. We always just put them outside, fed them, and then a few months later we had like eggs. But I was like, are there any other important in between steps during that time period when they're feathered and you're taking them out?
Yeah, usually before the birds go out into their outdoor runs, we'll vaccinate for fall pox. And typically at that 5 to 6 weeks of age is when we'll do it. Some folks like to trim wings around that time before they take them out as well, so that you don't have flyers. But it all depends, like I said, if you're putting them in a totally enclosed area or are they just in a fenced yard. That's going to really depend on your situation. Adjust your waters if you're using nipple ones. I just attach mine with wire so that I can adjust the height for the birds as they get bigger. And you typically want your waters for your birds to be at eye level for them wherever they're standing. We talked about floor space. That was one thing you asked, Shannon. So birds get older, you will need to increase the amount of square footage for each bird. They will start at about 3 weeks, 1 square foot per bird when they're 3 weeks old. And then it's just gonna increase as those birds get older. So by the time they're at 17 weeks or so, you're about almost a foot of space that is needed per bird by the time they are 17 weeks old. So you have to kind of think about that. Yeah. You know, and it's hard to like envision, but that's and we're talking floor space, nipples, and feeders, right? So how much do you need to have of space? And that is one thing we figured out with our waterers, is that making sure we have enough nipples for the amount of birds that we had was really important. So when they get that full
Because what's the biggest
17
size of like water for the
waterers are neat because you can adjust however many you have or want for the amount of birds that you have in a single pen. You connect these up with PVC pipe, the nipples go into them, and then they're connected up to a bucket. So I have mine connected up to like a 5-gallon bucket, or no, 2-gallon bucket. And then yeah, so you're just gonna have to refill the bucket as needed. But how many nipples you have on that run is gonna depend on how much birds you have. Usually about, you set up your waters, you want to have at least 4 inches of space between each waterer or each nipple, and then put about 1 for every 6 birds. You can have more on top of there. If you've got 12 of them in there, 4 to 6 nipples is probably pretty good on there, because they'll all want to try and go and drink and fight for something to drink from. Yeah, but yeah, I know that's what I noticed. Yeah. So, but it takes them to be about 30 weeks before they're full maturity, and they're going to start laying, right? So that's like 7 months old, 7-8 months old. Want to be aware of their age. So at that time you can start to put out a nesting box for them, put some shavings in there, get them used to it, get them going in there. Some things that I've noticed some folks have, or some people have said, was if you don't have roost and enough roosting space for your hens in there, they'll start to lay on the ground. And that's the one thing you want to avoid, is your hens laying on the ground. Make sure you have that roosting space, and you need about you probably want to go about 6 to 8 inches, maybe even more, of roosting bar per bird. Right. So that when you have some of the heavier set birds, you might need even more space. In a brooding box, or excuse me, not a brooding box, but a nesting box, you can go at about a foot per bird.
Oh, really?
You can do those at about that's about what we have. And having about 1 box for every 4-5 birds is usually efficient enough.
Okay.
But I have set up where I had more boxes, and they all lay in 1 box anyways. But give them the option, because if you have very dominant hens, you want to have at least another 2 or 3 boxes for that many birds. But yeah, so you need to look at those space requirements, and these are kind of things you have to plan out ahead of time too, when you're deciding how many hens you want to have, understanding the space requirements for everybody. So you need to have space requirements within your coop. You need to have a certain amount of space on the roosting bars. Yeah. And you need to have a certain amount of nesting boxes for your amount of hens that you have. Yeah. So take all those types of considerations in when you're deciding how many layers you want.
What else?
Some people kind of ask me too, like, how many birds should I have then? I can have as many as I want. So how many should I have? And question, but it's also more in preference. And, you can group about 6 to 10 birds together. Pretty good size for a backyard flock. Then the other thing is too, you have to think about once your layers are no longer laying and getting to that age, what do you do with them?
What are you going to do with them?
Are you going to keep them? Are you going to process them? We take out our older layers and we start to bring in new ones. It's kind of preference. Those are things that you need to think about.
Right.
Feeding recommendations for some of your flocks that maybe are then at mixed ages is that you kind of want to think about them as you're going, so that you're not really you don't really want to have like chick starter being fed to your older layers. Yeah, because it just has a higher protein content than your regular layer feed. Supplements that you can use for your older layers. And some other questions, why do we have soft shells? Your birds might not be getting enough
oyster shells.
Yeah, because they may not be getting enough calcium. So that's a supplement that you can use. And they're pretty good at using it as they need. So you don't really have to measure out those types of things.
Well, and I was also going to ask about additional supplements, because you actually have, like, some people, eggs are one of the few things I was like, because in general, most fruits and vegetables, organic or non-organic, in general, on average, nutrition wise, it's the same across the board. But with eggs, it's, if you feed them a diet in omegas, I was like, it's the egg actually has higher omegas. So it's kind of an interesting,
Yeah.
People make a lot more money. Well, not a lot, maybe, but depending on their cost for flaxseed. But it's like sometimes people make a good bit more because they can sell those
Or
because they do
higher.
have a higher omega content, or different. I don't know about other vitamins, but
yeah. And typically, your backyard poultry are going to be grazing a little bit too, so they'll have a lot deeper yellow yolk, which some people don't like, but it's just it just has to do with the beta carotene that they're getting from the forages that they're eating, and it doesn't really, to me, I can taste a difference as far as raising pullets in your backyard.
I mean, it's nice because it's a good project if you have young children, or even if you're a single person, a small group of people, or a couple, or just a couple of people. I don't know however you want to say it.
And
it's like, it's nice because you could do 2 to 4 very easily in a small space, and they have all kinds of new contraptions out if you want to buy rather than build your own. But like, there's easy DIY blueprints and projects online that people will walk you through all the steps for building the stuff if you want to do that too. But
depends on the type of system that you want to have. If you're going to have them confined, there's less labor, you have a smaller area, and your startup cost may be a little bit smaller because you're not having this large area to take care of. But you're going to have more manure buildup in there. And so you'll have to deal with other things like flies and whatnot. Those are things to consider when you're thinking about the type of confinement system that you want to use.
And they do have ones that you can roll now or put on wheels and move them, which is really nice option. So again,
chicken
depends
tractors
on your size, and all that stuff. So
okay. No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
We'll talk about chicken tractors for a bit, because those are, I think, to me, are probably the most cost-effective way to have a small flock in your backyard and have one that you're not having to kind of mess around with cleaning out a coop every day and all this kinds of stuff. Move your animals around.
And it keeps the bugs in your yard down too, just FYI.
Exactly, right. So they're essentially like your movable fertilizers in your yard,
and a little bit of pest control too. So they love the bugs.
And
the
so
bugs
you need
don't
a little
bother
bit
their system, which is the nice thing.
You need a little bit larger area to do it, but if you have the space to do it, it's a great way to start. And you have to think about whatever forage is in there. And it's a little bit more labor, but you don't have to worry. You don't have to really deal with the manure buildup because you can move them out. You kind of having that, you stimulate that nutrient cycle right in those areas. So
okay, I have a kind of tangential question. Well, maybe not, but I've had friends that live here that, like, some of them have talked about gathering like the jungle chicken eggs. Is that an okay thing is what I'm gonna ask, because I was like, I don't know what all they're exposed to, they haven't been vaccinated. I don't know what all that means. So I'm asking you.
I couldn't say one way or not if it's safe or not, because if you have captured one of these feral chickens, kept them in a cage, know exactly what they're eating, and I've done whatever you need to do to them to get them healthy and know that they're healthy, then you're essentially feeding them out, So we didn't talk about biosecurity, with your backyard hens. And I think that's an important thing to talk about, because a lot of these different viruses and diseases that we vaccinate for, Merrick's in one, it's a neurologic thing, and it can be spread through the wild bird population and not just other hens or other fowl, it can be spread through just other wild birds. So, you need to take that into consideration when you have your flock. Just one of your birds getting sick or whatnot can have you have to eliminate your whole entire flock.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because I forgot. We had a conversation prior to this a few weeks ago, I feel like, or maybe months ago now. But I remember you talking about, like, that there were certain diseases that, like, if you had a chicken that came up positive, you'd have to eliminate the whole flock. So
and Merrick's is probably one of them, because it'll become neurologic for them, and you just wouldn't want that to spread into an outside production zone, whether it's a neighboring property or whatnot. You have to take those things into consideration if you're going to plan to have your fowl in your backyard or poultry, and raising for pullets. Try to be sure you be safe about handling them. They do have salmonella, and it's a great opportunity for for you to teach your kids, and whatnot, but you have to be safe about how you're handling the birds. Go into your pen, and we had Janae on. We talked about biosecurity, and one of the things we talked about was having specific clothing and shoes for that area. So if you're going to go into your yard, use your shoes that you use at home to be in your yard, so that you're not taking whatever is in there out. If you go out to visit a friend's farm or whatnot, you don't need to spread things like that. Make sure your kids are washing your hands after they're done handling any of the eggs and anything like that. When you collect eggs, they have this bloom over them, and it does give the eggs some protection from bacteria over time. And essentially, if you don't wash that bloom off, it can last a lot longer. Here in Hawaii, we have hot, humid, very variable temperatures in our homes. So I don't suggest storing your eggs on your calendar as many do, like in other countries where it's a little bit cooler,
Yeah.
So I take ours. We don't wash out as long as our eggs are clean, which typically they are, because we clean our boxes every day. We keep those areas clean so that when our hens go in there, our eggs are laid on clean surfaces. Right. They're not dirty when we collect them. So we can take those ones directly, and I just store them directly into a fridge. If they are dirty, then we'll have to wash them, and we'll wash them really quickly. You want to use temperatured water that's a little bit on the warmer side, not so much cold, because your eggs are porous, so you have to remember that whatever is going to contact with your eggs, such as the solution or water, bacteria, or whatever's in there, can and will get in through those pores. So I typically wash ours in like a running water, or I'll dip them, wash them, and rinse them. There's a lot of egg washes out there that you can use. You can even use,
is there?
But know then that when you put those eggs in the fridge, they usually have a little bit shorter shelf life as compared to ones that have the bloom on them. We'll pin the Department of Health does have some recommendations for washing eggs if you're planning to sell them, but within your own household, making sure you just wash your eggs before you use them. And if your kids are out there collecting, make sure they wash their hands when they're done. If they've handled,
I would imagine if they were wanting to sell them, there would probably be additional licenses and stuff they need to look into getting as well.
Yeah.
And for that, if we decide to go that deep, maybe we could try and have someone from the Department of Health if they would be willing to get on to talk about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what we would need. I was like, I don't have that level of expertise.
That's a whole different ballgame if you're planning to sell your eggs that you're producing at home. So we're talking about raising your pullets or laying hens for backyard production for your own home use, not for selling. So those are so Shannon, you go back to your question about wild, the feral chicken population.
Because I was like, they're everywhere, at least where I live. So I was like, and I do have neighbors that have like, chicks and stuff, so I guess that goes also back more to your original thing about making sure the chicks you buy are vaccinated.
Yeah, because and you don't know where they have. And if you're collecting eggs and you just see, there's an egg there, you don't know how long it's sitting there, so unless you physically have seen and you put a box out for these birds to be laying in, I don't really know. And I would not say that it's safe or it's not safe. I think you need to use your own judgment on that. But the wild or feral fowl population can introduce other diseases to your domestic flock. So if you do have them out around in your area, you probably want to have it in confined enclosed area for your domestic flock to prevent any kind of cross contamination. And just to have a better biosecurity for your own flock. I can't think of anything else. I'm sure there's other things. I mean, if people have questions about if they want to get started, send us an email, and we're happy to help, answer questions. But I hope this is helpful.
You can email the Walaʻau podcast or Livestock Walaʻau podcast at Walaʻau at Hawaii.edu, or you can email Mele, and we'll throw her email address in there. In the show notes. Well, thank you for talking about it with us today, Mele. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
And make sure to join our Facebook page, the Livestock Extension Group, if you haven't already. And we are preparing over the next few months. We want to do a feedback fest, which is basically we want to hear from y'all and kind of what you think of the podcast, what you'd like to listen to in the future, kind of what we've done good, what you'd like to see us change, things like that, so that we can kind of hopefully improve this channel as time goes on and stuff, and really hone in on what y'all want to listen to. So we'll have that hopefully linked if we remember to in the show notes or the description box. And be sure to visit the CTAHR extension website and our YouTube channel that are also listed in the show notes.
Yeah, and for more information about this topic, see the show notes of the podcast and the description box on our YouTube page, or you can email us at walaʻau@hawaii.edu, or you can email me. And I'll put our email address in the description box as well. But thanks for listening to the Livestock Walaʻau. And before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast. That's us, by the way. And leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or any platform that you're listening. And then stay tuned for next month's episode.
Yes, thank you again to our sponsors, the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, USDA NIFA, the Livestock Extension Group, and CTAHR.
Yes, thanks for listening. Ahui ho.
Ahui ho.